No, hi, welcome to More Than Theology, the podcast. And today I have Isaac Pettersen. He's our guest, and he is the discipleship and young adults pastor at Crossroads Church in Palmerston North. And we're talking with Isaac about internships and how to run healthy internships, because at Crossroads Church, they've been running internships in partnership with Pathways for a few years now, and they do a really good job. And if you've been paying attention to the headlines at all recently, you'll know that internship doesn't always get a really hasn't enjoyed a really good reputation. Sometimes conjures up images of sort of exploitation and bad labour practices. And we wanted to address that because at Pathways we believe internships can, and certainly what we see, are often really healthy experiences. And so we realize too that there's just a whole range of different kinds of internships out there. And so we wanted to talk to Isaac, who's pretty involved with the internships at Crossroads, and get some ideas about how to run internships that are healthy, that work really well, yes, for the church or for the ministry that's running the internship, but also critically for the student or the intern themselves, so that it's an enjoyable and positive and enriching experience for everyone involved. So, Isaac, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What's involved in your role at Crossroads, and how did you end up there?
Yeah, so as you said, I oversee discipleship and young adults. So that involves anything to do with our university students. Palmy is a uni city, so we get quite a lot of students each year, which is awesome. So I'm involved with them as well as any of our young adults that are just permanently in the city. And I also oversee our discipleship, which includes all of our connect groups, things like our Alpha course, and anything to do with our mentoring framework that we have. So we have mentors here at Crossroads as well as developing the teaching and that sort of thing here at Crossroads. So a few different things, but a lot of them cross over in a number of ways. And I've been here for almost 5 years, and I moved overseas when I was a kid, but before we moved overseas, I came to Crossroads. And so when I came back to New Zealand when I was 21, after finishing some study at seminary in the States, I just came back to Crossroads knowing it was a place that would be a good church to be a part of, and spent a couple of years here. And while I was here, the youth pastor at the time was moving on and asked if I would be interested, and I was. And so I moved into that role, and have over time moved into the roles that I'm involved in now.
Cool. And Isaac and I were talking before we hit record today about a bit of his upbringing, and I didn't realise this, but yeah, he was born in Palmy, grew up largely in Scotland, went to Little Rock Baptist Seminary, and then came to New Zealand just a few years ago, and blew me away because he does not have a Scottish accent at all. But he said it's a bit like a foreign language that you just kind of leave behind because it's so different. So anyway, yeah. Good to have you here and sounding very Kiwi, Isaac. So, for some people, especially these days, intern is kind of a dirty word, or it might be for some people, because, we've heard headlines about some prominent churches that have been running internships that perhaps weren't the most beneficial, and perhaps weren't operating by best practices. So how at Crossroads do you ensure that internship is a really positive experience?
Yeah, so when we started considering bringing on interns again at Crossroads, even all those years ago, I was aware of the stigma around internships, and that there are either often one or two directions. They either, the interns are sort of used and abused and worked incredibly hard, or the internship is not really set up properly, and people show up devoting a year to an internship and there's nothing really prepared for them. And so when going into planning out an internship here at Crossroads, I was aware of those things, and really wanted to make sure that wouldn't be the case here at Crossroads. And so in that first year, before we even announced the internship, at that time I was overseeing the youth and young adults, and I was developing it specifically for youth and young adults at that time. I started thinking about what they would look like and how we would present that. And so I'd say I probably even over-engineered it a little bit in that first year, just trying to make sure that there would be meaningful and plenty of things to get involved in. And so I designed a schedule of like, hey, this is what a week would look like if you were interning here at Crossroads. and these are the things that you would be involved in. And so there were things like we got connected to a local school, and there was an opportunity for our interns to be youth chaplains there at the school. And just basically made sure that there was going to be plenty. And so as we advertised it, we could say, hey, we'd love for you to come intern, and this is what we have available for you. So you're not just coming in blind, but you actually know that there's going to be a fulfilling year ahead. So so that was a big part of it. But designing a program is one thing, but the other key element was relationship with the people that were going to intern with us. And so before they even signed up to interning with us, I spent a number of time just meeting with them. So I would meet with them and say, hey, like, what is it that you are passionate about? What is it that you want to grow in, get involved in? I'd then go away and think about that. And then I would come back to them in another meeting and say, hey, based on what you share with me, I think these would be some of the specific things you could do this year that would help develop those key roles. And so then they could go away being like, okay, if I do this internship, this is what I'm going to do. And yet that's exactly what I'm keen for. And so by the time they fill out the application and they and go through the intern agreement and all that sort of stuff, they can be confident in the year that they have ahead. And so I think, and which I'm happy to expand on those things, but initially those would be two key things: was actually having something planned rather than them just showing up and making it up, and also building a relationship with the potential interns prior to them arriving.
Yeah, cool. That's really helpful. I've been to your facility, Crossroads Church facility, on a weekday, and when you go in there, like there's a bunch of people in the cafe, a lot of whom are current interns, some of them are past interns, perhaps some future interns there as well. So you guys have a bit of a culture of internship at Crossroads. How has that happened?
Yeah, so I can't really take the credit for that. When I was in seminary, I spent a bit of time with the church over in the States, who initially it was like a university ministry, and a new guy moved in and thought, hey, like, we could actually turn this into a bit of a church plant. And the church, they met in a house which they was dedicated to this church. And how it kind of worked is it was open all week, and there was a couple students who lived in the house, and they lived there for free, and part of the deal was one of them would always be around so that it could always be open. And so they sort of had this culture within this church of we are a community who we live together, we do life together. And so it was quite a cool place to just kind of come and go whenever you need to. You come and study there or just hang out there, even stay the night there. It was just a lot of fun, and it just felt like it was more than just a church that meets on a Sunday. And I really appreciated that, and it had a profound impact on me. And so when I was here at Crossroads and was started overseeing the young adults, I thought, how do I create that culture here? And obviously we have a facility rather than just meeting in a house, so there'd be some different things to consider. But we thought about, like, let's put some real effort into the cafe area of our church and allow that to be a place where people can come and go, spend their day. They can come study, they can come just hang out, have a coffee, use the Wi-Fi. We often put different sports events on the TV there so people can come hang out. And so we basically just continue to say, hey, we have this space, it's open through the week, come use it if you want to. We're here and available. And over the last couple of years, that culture has just continued to build, and it's just become a normal part of being a part of Crossroads. And as time goes on, new people come into town, and people who've been around for a while are like, hey, I'm going to be at the cafe on Thursday, do you want to come down? And so there's just kind of been this building of a culture of our church is not just a place that we use for worship services and events, but it's a place you come and just hang out and be. So and especially people who have interned with us, they've found value in that. And so if they've continued to study or something along those lines, they continue to use the space. And yeah, some people who have interned with us have, part of the reason why they've come on board is because they've really got to know us and spend time with us through just hanging out in the cafe, which has been cool.
It's really cool. I like it. It's a good vibe down there. I usually like to tell churches that internships are a win-win, because they're a win for the intern themselves. They get a year of, real in-depth and intentional input in terms of Bible, theology, mentoring. But it's a win for the church as well, because they have somebody, an extra pair of hands on deck, somebody who's able to really help make things happen on the ground. And so from your perspective, what are the wins that you see for your interns, and what are the wins you see for Crossroads?
Yeah, so I think what's been really cool is in like the last 3 years of having interns, almost all of our interns have gone on to further theological study or are involved in ministry. Like our current youth pastor was an intern with me, which was really cool. So it's been awesome to see that for pretty much all of our interns, it hasn't been a throwaway year. There has been massive development in them, just in their spiritual life, but also in their ability as leaders. And they've all gone on to use those gifts and skills that they've developed over that year. So that's been really cool. And, I frequently meet with our interns throughout their internship, mostly each week, to check in with how they're going. And it's been cool to see like their progress and their confidence build in specific areas of ministry and that sort of thing. So there's definitely been a massive win for them there. And for us, there's just been a number of things that we've been able to achieve that we wouldn't have been able to achieve, not only because of just extra numbers, but just extra gifts and abilities and skills that people bring. Like, for example, this year we developed our mentoring program, which we launched earlier in the year, and one of our interns who was doing discipleship worked alongside me in developing that. And there's so many things that he added to it that if I had done it alone, it wouldn't have been as successful of a launch as it was. There were so many things. I'll be writing something and he'd be like, do you think maybe we should word it that way? Or do you think maybe we should clarify that a different way? And maybe we should actually like delay that a little bit. And so it just came together in such a beautiful manner because of his input. But also, there's just been like a number of other things that we've achieved. Like we've run a young adults camp for a number of years, and over the years we've been able to kind of build on that and add to that because we've had a team putting that together rather than just one single individual. Even this year, one of our interns oversaw Alpha for us, and we've run the Alpha program for a number of years, but just him bringing his personality and his flavor and his giftings to that, it enhanced it in a number of ways. And in the years to come, I will implement a number of the things that he implemented just from seeing how beneficial they were. So, there's just a lot that we've been able to do over the last few years that we just wouldn't have been able to do without them. And it hasn't just been because, cool, there's 3 extra people to give a hand. It's been like, oh man, you have gifts and abilities that I do not have, and so we can make that happen because you have those skills, which has been really cool.
Yeah, and one thing that I think that brings up too is, you've had interns involved in some quite high level stuff, and some of the quality of the interns, or the quality of some of the interns you've had, is really high. You've got high caliber interns, and I think, and they're a range of ages. They're not just, they're not just people that are straight out of school, and they're not just people that are mid-career. There's a range of ages. But I think that's probably a testament to the quality of how you've run your internship, so that there are people who, they are in the middle of a career, but they look at what you're doing, and they think, actually, I want to be involved with that. And then when you get that kind of person with those kind of giftings, you actually connect them with something that's quite meaningful. And there's always going to be aspects of an internship where, there's the sort of the dirty work. But what I see you guys doing is actually connecting interns to areas of service that are actually going to stretch them as well as put their gifts to use. So I think that that's probably a pretty key part of what you're doing. Yeah.
And that goes back to that, the relationship aspect of things is really important. So, the very first year we did I just designed a slightly more generic, this is the youth and young adults internship. And as the year went on with those first interns, we developed what that specifically looked like for each individual. But in the years following, we've developed like an individual intern program for each intern that makes sense to them. And we also have used this really useful tool last year. It's called the Selector Assessment. We do it with all of anybody who's a potential employee here as well. And it's kind of like a well-rounded sort of personality test that looks at your personality, but also your skills and abilities. And so it's been really cool because I'll have meetings with potential interns about, hey, this is what you could do this year. And then we also get the results from that. And we think, actually, if we put them in that space, that could potentially burn them out or really exhaust them. So maybe we shouldn't do that and we should make some adjustments. And so there's a bit of a combination of building that relationship, having a framework already in place for the internship, as well as doing that sort of assessment, and then bringing all of those things into consideration to be like, okay, what would actually be a beneficial internship for you? And then making tweaks along the way, because we start off and some things work really well and some things we're like, actually, maybe that isn't the best fit for you, or they recognize, hey, actually, I'm not sure if I've got the capacity for that. And then we just tweak and adjust to make sure that it is, really uplifting their gifts and, allowing them to just achieve what's best for them in the year rather than making them fit the mold that we have for them. So,
Yeah, I've noticed a trend over the years of churches and also Christian camps running internships in-house. So it's not through Pathways or any sort of similar, any other kind of Bible college. Why don't you do yours in-house?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons. I think one of them is the fact that these guys are studying with you guys, and it's a part of the requirement that they do these ministry hours. So it's not just us saying, hey, like, we'd love for you to come and do some free work for us. It's saying, like, hey, like, you want to further your theological knowledge and just your ministry experience. And so Pathways is going to provide part of that, and we hope to provide the other part. And it just kind of gives us, I guess, a bit more leeway to say, hey, like, there's actually purpose to your year, and there's a reason why you're doing this. It's to grow in these things and, also receive a qualification. So that works as well. It also gives us a really good framework for our interns to say, hey, like, you're required to do 16 hours a week. And so we will make sure there is 16 hours a week of work that can be done, and we won't require you to do more than that. If you do end up doing more than that, then that will be time in lieu, and we will make sure you get that time off. And so it helps us also create a healthy framework to make sure our interns are treated fairly and properly, and it's not just kind of come and do some free work and we'll just give you as much as there's time for. It. It's like, no, we actually have some criteria to meet and some obligations that we need to honor. So it just makes sure that if we were just designing it ourselves, it could be anything, but because we do it within your framework, it really helps make sure that they're safe and that the internship is appropriate and what it needs to be.
No, that's cool. And you mentioned too, a lot of your interns have gone on to carry on doing theological study, and so the year at Pathways can be cross-credited into a lot of bachelor's degrees in theology or applied theology, and then they can just carry on their studies. So some real benefits there. So one of the big issues that churches and other ministries face is actually just finding interns, finding people to actually do it. Maybe I'll just give a little bit of context here. Quite often I get calls from churches or camps or other ministries saying, hey, we would love an intern. Have you got one for us? And it's so rare that we actually have somebody, on the shelf, if you like, ready to kind of hand out. And I would love it if we had this cache of orphan interns just looking for a place to go, but it just doesn't seem to work that way. So there are a lot of churches out there that want to have interns, but they just don't have any within their ranks or anyone that they think might fit the bill. Now, I realize that sometimes that's just a problem of size or demographic. They might just not have anyone that's in a stage of life that's ready to do it. But what for you, like, how does Crossroads go about finding interns?
Yeah, so we do obviously have the advantage of being a university city. So we have a large number of young adults, which helps, and just size in general just means there might be more likely to be somebody who's keen. So that's helpful for sure. But one of the key things is that relationship building. And so before we launched back into having interns at Crossroads, I had a couple of years to just really get to know people and build relationships with them and have those, I see you sort of conversations where I'd say, hey, like, I see massive ministry potential in you. One of our interns who's interning with us this year, I remember back in, he must have been year 10, year 11. I remember having that conversation with him and saying, man, I see massive ministry potential in you and leadership potential in you. I think you should consider ministry seriously. And at that time, he wasn't really sure, wasn't really keen. And here we are, like 4 years later, and he's interning with us, which is super awesome. So I think if you want to have interns but you don't have any on hand, just committing the next year or two to, like, okay, I'm going to build some relationships, whether it's in my local church or other opportunities, to just say, I'm going to get to know some people. I'm going to have those sorts of conversations with them. And out of that relationship, hopefully somebody would be keen. And that's obviously not the only reason we build those relationships. There's been plenty of people that I would love to have interned, and it hasn't gone that way. And I'm, not sour about that at all. Like, it's like, cool, that's great. I saw great potential in you, and you're going to use it in another way. Just wanted to let you know that the opportunity was there if you were keen for it. So I think that is really important. But I think some of the other important things is like, if you go to our website, crossroads.co.nz, we have a section on our website called Internship, and on that has all the initial information you would need to know about what an internship at Crossroads would look like. And so if people are interested, they can kind of have a bit of information about, okay, I know what that might be. And we even receive interest from overseas and things, which is pretty cool as well. We don't feel like we have the capacity right now to accommodate for that, but they usually find it through our website, which is cool. So all of that information is there, as well as we do things like advertise on social media and stuff. And it's not really something like we just advertise just like, we're just looking for anybody, because it's, like I said, the relationship's key. It's more kind of, we just advertise within our church community and within our local community and stuff as well, and do some targeted advertising for interning. But so far, all of our interns have been in-house. They've been people that we have built relationships with, and currently next year, one of our staff members is going to be continuing to do some stuff with Pathways, but we don't have anybody specifically. It's like, yeah, I want to be an intern, and we're totally okay with that, because again, it's really about relationship. It's not about, hey, we've got 3 spots and we need to fill them, so we better get the word out to make sure somebody's here to do it. It's about, yeah, if this is going to be beneficial to somebody, then this is what it's here for. And if there's a year where there's nobody, that's totally fine. We'll keep talking about it. We'll keep encouraging it, and we'll just trust that. When we have interns, it's because it was the right time and it's what the Lord led them to. So.
Yeah, and what I love about that too is you haven't structured things so that the moment you don't have an intern or you don't have as many interns, ministries are falling over left and right. It's like, because to me that when that happens, or when church is set up that way, that's when interns are going to be facing potential burnout and that kind of thing, because they're actually like, we need you, and we possibly need you for more hours than you committed. So I think that's really healthy too. And, one thing I've heard, I'm thinking of another church that's done this when they've advertised, like you said, in-house advertising within the church, is they've really avoided the language of youth or young, or because sometimes I think people, when they automatically associate intern with young adult or school leaver or something like that. Now, a lot of interns are, because they're in that space and stage of life where they can go, hey, I'm just going to do this for a year, and it doesn't matter if I'm disappear for a week at a time to go to block course. But when the church that I'm thinking of, when they did this, they had 4 people, all I think in their 40s plus, put up their hands. Now, not all of them ended up becoming interns, but they were all initially at least interested. Awesome. And I think that's another thing, instead of thinking, oh, well, we don't have anyone in year 13 or 7th form, so we don't have any potential interns, just think about, what about the wider congregation? You might have a parent at home who wants to do a bit of study. And we now, by the way, offer part-time, the diploma part-time.
Awesome.
So it means that you're not having to go for whole weeks. You can go for a couple of days. You might have people who are just looking for a career shift. And you might even, who knows? You might have, people that are getting to the twilight years of their life that have got more time on their hands that want to do it. Yeah. So I think, just keeping an open mind about the demographic and not limiting it even in subtle ways by just sort of saying, hey, young people, are you interested? I think that's kind of key as well. The last thing I'd say, sorry, I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but this is stuff that good. I'm seeing in churches like Crossroads and other churches that are doing these internships well, it's the domino effect, or it's the culture of internships, that you get those, maybe that finding that first intern or two is quite tricky. But once you've got somebody in place, then other people see that and they think, oh, I'd like to do that. And we see that all the time at Pathways, that an organization sends an intern, puts an intern through our program, and then the next year they do it again and again, and it kind of gets a bit of momentum.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. Let's talk a little bit about next steps. Like you mentioned earlier, you maybe even over-engineered things a little bit from your side. But to me, that just sounds like being super diligent and onto it, which is cool. But what are some of the kind of practical considerations from your end or from a church's end that you need to think about in terms of sort of designing a good internship program? You mentioned sort of stuff around scheduling. What else do you need to kind of think about?
Yeah, so I think some of the initial background things that need to be considered is so we put together a intern application form, and that asks a number of things like their faith journey so far, areas that they feel the Spirit has gifted them in, what does it mean to be a leader, as well as some practical things like police vetting and that sort of thing as well. And so we designed an application form. So when a potential intern sees that, they kind of get a sense of what sort of level of responsibility or expectations there are. We also have an internship agreement. So once they've filled out the application form, we've had meetings with them, we've put them through that selector assessment, and they still think, yep, I'm keen for this. We then come together and sign that agreement of hey, this is what it's going to mean. And those are some very practical things of these are the amount of hours that we'll expect from you. This is the sort of support we will give you while you're here. And just a few things like that. So I think, you've got to have some of those sort of more legalities and just helpful framework put in place. So I think that's really important, so that you can just be confident that when you start advertising for interns, you've actually got the steps in place for that to start well. I think also sitting down and thinking about, okay, what would an internship look like here? So for us, we began with youth and young adults, and we've grown it since then, and we've had interns involved in worship, we've had interns involved in discipleship and pastoral care, and we've kind of expanded it since then. Thinking about okay, what would it look like for somebody to intern with the youth? What would be helpful, rather than just giving them odd jobs? What would be some things that we would love to see happen, that we can dream about, that if we had another person with us we could do? What would it look like within our young adults? What would it look like within discipleship? And then being able to take those things to a potential intern saying, hey, if you were a youth intern here, this is what it could look like. But then having that conversation so that they might say, well, I am interested in that, but I'm not really sure if I would be good at that. And then going back and tweaking and that sort of thing. I think that's really helpful as well. And then as well, on our website, we have all the information of what an internship, not every single detail, but just if you wanted somebody to initially know what an internship would look like, that's all there. That used to come in the form of a booklet, and we would give that out, and it would be available. And then we thought, let's just put it on the website. That's where everybody gets their information anyway. So I think, that would be really important as well. And then I think it's really important to communicate if you are part of a team, with the team on that process as well. And so, with our initial interns, I mostly designed a lot of that initial program, but the reality is they're a part of the staff team for an entire year, so they're going to be in everybody's spheres. And so after that first year, we had a bit of a meeting with everybody about hey, what did you think worked well? What do you think didn't? And that was part of the reason why we did things we brought on the selector assessment. We talked about how I didn't know that was something that we were going to be working with when that person came on as an intern. I didn't know about that, and that has affected a number of team members. So maybe let's put them through that assessment so we get a better idea of who we're working with. It also meant that rather than me just giving the tick on who would be an intern as well, we put together a bit of a team of who would be a part of that process. So I think involving, even if you're the specific person who's going to oversee the interns, involving the other staff members in that conversation is important as well, as they're going to be sharing space with them. So, so I think that's also incredibly important. I think to me that would be most of the initial steps that you'd want to have in place to begin developing your internship.
Is it expensive for the church?
No, I mean, there are some costs involved, but they're usually costs that we choose to invest in. So we appreciate how much time our interns give to us. And so we will often pay, if I'm going to say some sort of helpful conference or something, and if it's on discipleship, well, then it makes sense that I take the discipleship intern with me as well. And so we've chosen to invest in them in those sorts of ways, which has been really cool. But to be honest, no, not financially wise. not greatly, and it's been really cool to see our community get behind it as well. And there's been a number of individuals who have given money to our interns anonymously to support them and encourage them as well. But I think that the time and effort and energy that your interns give, whatever cost it is, it's worth it, because they give so much more than you financially put in. Obviously, it's going to cost in energy, it's going to cost in time. And I kind of recognize that when we brought on interns, I probably lost maybe at least 10 hours a week of the time that I used to have before they came on, but then recognize that all of them give back more than 10 hours. So it was 10 hours worth losing. And it wasn't really that I was losing it. It was just redirecting it and investing it in a different way. So yeah, I think the biggest cost will be time and energy, but that's worthwhile as well. And the financial cost is pretty minimal considering how much they contribute.
Yeah, and just for some listeners that maybe aren't unaware, because the Pathways diploma is NZQA accredited, that means that students are able to access, student allowances and the fees-free program. And there's also a lot of scholarships available. So there are funding sources out there. Some of the things that I think some churches pay for is travel to and from block courses. That's maybe not as key when you're, say, relatively close or in the North Island, but we've got students from the South Island, and they to come up to Tauranga 6 times a year, there's a cost there. So a church might pay for that. But and we do think that block course model, even though it's a bit of a hassle for people having to travel a long way, it's actually really enriching for the students as well, rather than just, say, doing it online. So I do think it's good value for money, and it sounds like you guys do too. Can we just talk a little bit about mentoring a little bit? I think it's a really key part of the Pathways emphasis is the mentoring part. So for listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with it, our students have 3 mentors, but the mentors are provided by the placement organisation. So can you just talk a little bit about what that takes to make a quality mentoring program for your interns, Isaac?
Yeah. So as you said, there's 3 different mentors for each intern. And usually like the ministry mentor will be the person who oversees that ministry. So if I have a discipleship intern, then I will be their ministry mentor. Then when it comes to having the academic mentor, they're not required to, but usually there'll be like one person in particular who is that academic mentor for all of our interns, so that they can have discussions together as a group if that's helpful. And so for this year, I've been the academic mentor for all of our interns, which has been cool. But there have been years where somebody said, I'd actually like to meet with this person. I've already got a close relationship with them, and I think they'd be great for that. So usually those first 2 are pretty well sorted out in-house. Then when it comes to their spiritual mentor, we first of all just ask them, like, hey, is there anybody in your life that would be the person that you would go to talk to when you're finding things tough, or you've got questions about life or faith? And most of the time they've usually already got somebody in mind. Like I said, we do have a mentoring framework here at Crossroads, so we really encourage mentoring relationships. So a number of them already have somebody in mind, and even if it's not like an official mentoring thing, they're like, yeah, I meet with them, and they get in contact, and that person's available. If there isn't somebody who's available, then I take that on as my responsibility to find them a mentor, and that's only happened a couple of times, but when it has, then it's actually panned out really well, and often God's provided. One time, one of the interns said, yeah, I haven't really got somebody for a spiritual mentor yet. And I said, okay, I'll get on to finding you one. And then that Sunday, somebody came to me and said, hey, I think I'd really love to mentor some young guys. Is there anybody that would need that? And I said, in fact, I'm looking for somebody right now, and you'd be the perfect guy. So that was really cool how that developed that way. So yeah, usually the ministry and academic mentor we sort out in-house, and that's not too complicated. And then the spiritual one, they usually have somebody, and if they don't, it hasn't been too much of a hassle to find someone. But there has been occasions where it wasn't panning out with the spiritual mentor that they had, and sometimes the interns have been a little bit kind of not as proactive in finding a new one, and so we've had to like communicate with you guys at Pathways, or and just go on that process and that journey. And I really appreciate like your patience and those sorts of things of recognizing that a mentoring relationship is a relationship, and so you don't want to just cut one and start the next one the next day to make sure it aligns time-wise, but making sure that there's time to wind down the previous relationship and start the next one. And yeah, it's great that you guys are available to help in those sorts of situations if they arise. But that's pretty much the process that we've gone through.
Yeah, and I think because there are multiple mentors, it means that when a mentor withdraws or it's just not working out, the intern isn't left in the lurch. It might be a few weeks before they find somebody to fill that spot, but in the meantime, the other mentors are there and a listening ear, and so they all wear different hats, but the divides between them aren't that sharp. And I've seen it work really well too with multiple interns. I'm thinking of one situation we had where an intern was in a big church where there was a lot of demands being put on them, and one mentor, being on staff perhaps wasn't seeing that, whereas another mentor who wasn't on staff was able to see it and was able to speak into it, and as a result we were able to work with that church to get their workload to a manageable and sustainable kind of level, and that meant that the internship was really positive. But at Pathways we rely heavily on the mentors, and so I guess a big shout out to any mentors out there, both at Crossroads and elsewhere, because we couldn't do what we do without the hard work you put in. And I don't think it's necessarily particularly onerous in terms of time. It's more just about am I willing to meet occasionally with this person and care about their situation, and if something's going wrong, actually step in and help out. So it's really cool. What are some of the biggest challenges that we haven't covered to running an internship program that you've found?
I think something important to consider is interns are obviously people, right? And people are complex, and they have a number of things that they're working through on their own. And as you begin to develop a relationship with an intern, there might be some things that are uncovered about their life or about their past that are really difficult. And so there can be quite a high level of pastoral care involved in having interns. Because they're more than like somebody who's just here to do jobs, right? They are people that we want to encourage and develop and grow. And so I think that's something that needs to be considered, that if you were thinking about like, we'll bring on an intern and we'll put them in that office over there and we'll just leave them to it, that they'll probably, they might do well, but they also might really struggle with just where that puts them mentally. So I think, just being aware that there is a high level of pastoral care, and I'm really grateful for the team that we have here. We have a pastoral care pastor, and there have been times in our internship program where she has been heavily involved in the care of our interns, and so that's been really helpful. But that is definitely something to consider. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenge. We've been really fortunate in that we haven't really had any very difficult personalities. Most people just love Jesus and exude the fruit of the Spirit, and so we haven't had anything like that. But just being aware as well that there could be those sorts of problems as well, with personality clashes and differences in opinion and that sort of thing. But I think just recognizing this is a person that's going to need my care and my support as well as my direction and leadership, and I'm going to need to make sure I give time to that as well. And that will honestly kind of make or break the internship, right? Because if they're given lots of opportunities, but they're just kind of left to it and they flounder a little bit, then they'll probably feel a bit discouraged about their internship. But if you're there to care for them and support them along the way, and when things are tough, say, hey, let me just take some of that responsibility away for a little bit, so you've got a bit more capacity to work through where you're at. I think that's massively valuable, that they can say, not only was I challenged this year, but I was cared for.
Yeah, and for what I've seen, you guys have done such a good job on that front, so good on you. It's been really cool and really heartening to see from our end. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I mentioned that intern has become a bit of a dirty word, or internship, and you mentioned even before all the recent headlines that people already have kind of some negative connotations sometimes, depending on what they've seen. But so at Pathways, we've sometimes talked about, is there a better word we could be using than internship? What can you think of any words that would kind of capture the experience, a positive internship experience at Crossroads that might be better than intern?
Yeah, no, we've continued to use the phrase internship. I'm trying to think. I was recently reading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Marcoma, and he's got I'd have to relook at it. He's got a word that he uses for like when people are invested in, and it's slipping my mind right now.
Apprentice to Jesus?
Yeah, that's it. Apprentice.
Yeah. He says that a bit, doesn't he? Yeah.
He uses the phrase apprenticeship a lot. That's the one. So I did think about that, but I think it's one of those things where you could change the name, but I think when you do, people sort of know what you're doing, and they know like it's because of the intern. So you might as well just embrace the phrase internship and just like, but also address the realities of the fact that there is that stigma with internships, and recognizing and choosing to be different, right? I think same thing happens with Christianity. There's Christians. The phrase Christianity envelops a spectrum of individuals, and there'd be some that would be like, oh man, I hate that they also represent our crew, but I'm not looking to change what I'm called as a follower of Jesus. So I think that's it, right? You just recognize that in all things there is good and there's bad, and we want to be the good example, and so we've just embraced the phrase internship and interns, and just try to be a good example of what it can look like when it's healthy.
Yeah, and you definitely have been a good example of that, and I'm so glad that you've been able to come on the podcast and we're able to share that with a wider group of people, because you have been doing a really good job with the internships. You're not the only church or provider that's doing a good job. We've been blessed with heaps of partnerships where people are doing a great job, but you definitely have been putting in some excellent mahi over the last few years, and so thanks for coming on and being able to share out of that experience. And hopefully this will just enable other churches and other ministries that maybe don't have that history of healthy internships behind them to actually kind of take that step and get into it and see some transformed lives as a result. So thanks so much for being here, Isaac. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having us. We really value what you guys do, and our internship program wouldn't happen without you. So, thank you for inviting me on.
Ka kite anō.